All right, good afternoon, everyone. Can you confirm that you can see my screen and hear me? Awesome, thank you. Okay, so thank you for joining this workshop today. It's on leading effective labs and tutorials in engineering online. So first, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Ashley Lehman. I'm a PhD student. I just started in May at the University of Windsor on my PhD. Before that, I was over at FCA working at CTC in Auburn Hills. And I'm here today doing this workshop because I was a GA last semester for an engineering course, and I learned a few things about running labs and tutorials online, and I wanted to share them with you as you start to do your GA or TA ship for the fall semester of 2020. So first of all, I just want to say being a GA or a TA online can be a little bit difficult. I was also a GA back when I was doing my master's at the University of Windsor about 5 years ago. And the difficulties that I found were that you can't see the students often. They're usually not sharing their camera during tutorials or labs. And it's really hard to gauge if they're understanding the material and where they're struggling. Also, learning how to mark online can be a little bit of a struggle. You have to learn how to work with Blackboard, and making annotations directly onto the assignments can be a little bit of a learning curve. You have less interaction with your fellow GAs and TAs, so I think that over the last semester when I was a GA, I probably only saw the other GAs for my course 2 times on camera in total. So it was kind of unfortunate that you don't get to kind of interact with your peers and join that network. And then lastly, of course, there's always technical difficulties when you're working online. There were so many times when people were on mute and didn't realize they were on mute, or their internet connection was just drop out randomly. So there's a lot of issues that can occur when you're being a GA or TA online. But I'm hoping that this workshop will help prepare you for dealing with these issues and make the best out of the situation that we're dealing with. And I wanted to just put it up this quote from Warren Buffett. It's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from other people's mistakes. So that's kind of my idea for this workshop. Is I'm hoping that I can share kind of what I went through over the last semester, and it will help you guys in the fall have a smoother transition. So the outline for this workshop, I'm not expecting it to go the full hour and a half, but we'll see how it goes. I want to start off by learning a little bit about you, the participants in this workshop, and so I can understand your experience and what you're hoping to get out of this workshop and make sure that I'm covering all those areas. And then I want to talk about my experience last semester as a GA. Then I want to go over some feedback I got from the students in the course that I was a GA for, because I sent out a survey to get some recommendations, and I think that these can be really helpful, and I'd like to share them with you. Then I want to do a really quick group activity, and then I'll go over some practical tips, which are basically a summary of what I learned from my experience being a GA online and from this the student survey feedback. And then I want to finish up with a Q&A. So first off, learning about you. So I'm going to use a feature that we have here in Blackboard that you may be able to use as when you're a GA in the fall semester, and it's called polling. You may have used this before if you took any courses last semester online. So I'm going to start this poll, and the question is, have you ever been a GA or a TA in person or online before? So I've posted the poll now. You should be able, a pop-up should have came up so you can select your answer. So I can see the responses are coming in now. The poll is empty. You can also put your answer in the chat if it's not working. But the answer number 1 is if you've been a GA online only, 2 is for in-person only, 3 is online and in-person, you've done both, and then 4 is you've never been a GA or a TA. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to show the responses. I think we have most of them in. So there's a good mix. I saw someone in the chat saying number 4, so they've never been a GA or TA. So I'm going to try to cover a wide range of topics because it looks like you guys have a wide range of experience. Okay, now I'm going to end that poll. So the next question is, have you been assigned a GA or a TA position for the next semester, so fall 2020? So if you pick 1, it's yes, 2 is no, and 3 is not sure. Okay, I think everyone's in. I'll show responses. So quite a few people not sure yet if they've received a GA or TA position for fall of 2020. I'm in the mechanical engineering department, and in my case, the department secretary, Angela Haskell, sent out an email probably a week ago with announcing who received their positions. I'm not sure how it works in the other departments. I think it's similar, but maybe it's a little bit behind. Okay. So now for the people who have been assigned a GA or TA position for fall of 2020, I was wondering if you have received, reviewed, and signed your Form 1 yet. So I'm going to put up another poll. So if you have done all that, pick number 1. If you haven't, pick number 2. And if you're not sure what a Form 1 is, pick number 3. Okay. Okay, you did your part, still waiting for feedback from the prof. I think a lot of people are in that situation right now. So just in case you don't know what the Form 1 is, I took a snapshot of mine, and that's what's shown here on the right. And it's basically like a document that you and the professor for the course that you're going to be a GA or TA for sign. And it will say the amount of hours that you've been allocated for that GA or TA position. So for me, it's 140 hours. And then it breaks down where you're going to be spending those hours. So in training, preparation, so maybe preparing for tutorials or labs, your contacts, so that could be your office hours. You usually have to run some office hours as part of your position. Marking, that's a huge part of being a GA or TA, and then there can be other duties depending on the course. And these should add up to 140. And then depending on the course that you're a GA or TA for, your professor might have a mid-semester review where you can go back and make sure you're on track. You're not spending too many hours on any particular category. And you can revise it potentially if you do find that you're spending many hours on a certain thing. Maybe they can spread out the hours among the GAs more fairly. Okay, this next question is, have you ever taken an online course? I'll show responses. So it looks like the majority of you have taken an online course. I think that's really helpful because when you're a GA online, you know where the students are coming from and you can kind of understand their issues. But also you're okay if you haven't. Last semester was my first time taking an online course, and I kind of learned as I went, so you can be fine either way. Okay, and now for this last question, I was just wondering if you have anything in particular that you're hoping to talk about today in this workshop. So this one won't be a poll, it's another feature. If you look on the top left of your screen, you should see 3 lines, 3 horizontal lines, and then there's a cursor, a pointer, a pencil, a square, and then a T for text. If you select that T, and you click anywhere on this slide, you can go ahead and type a message. So you could write anything that you're interested. I'll just show you right now. I'm going to type in hello. So hopefully you can see that now. So I'll give you a few minutes. If there's anything in particular, maybe you're interested in marking or office hours or anything particular that you aren't sure about how to do online, you could type it out now. Okay, office hours. Okay. You could also type it in the chat if you have something in particular. I was hoping to show off this feature in case you want to use it when you're a GA. How to make students stay engaged, softwares and resources for design labs. Okay. How to use breakout rooms, effective tutorials. Okay. I'm going to take a quick screenshot of this just to make sure I don't miss anything. But I think all of these topics should be covered. And at the end, if you feel like we missing, you can bring it up then as well. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to clear this and move on now. Thank you very much. Oh, it's still typing. Okay, so now I want to go into my experience as a GA last semester. So it was my first time being a GA online. The course that I was a GA for had 2 sections of about 90 undergrad engineering students in each section. So it was a pretty big course, but fortunately there were 5 GAs assigned to this course, so we got to split up the marking and the duties, which was nice. Sorry, I just saw a message. My only concern is practical way to utilize our time to plan effectively to not only participate in our GA activities, but also tend to our own studies and research. That's a really good point. It is hard to find a work-life balance between everything. And I will get to that through this presentation. So this course that I was a GA for had labs, tutorials, and a design project. We were responsible for having office hours once a week. Each one was 1 hour, and I was lucky in my case. The professor for our course asked us when we would like to have it so that we could select a time that was convenient for us. And then they post that in the syllabus so the students know when and where to find you. In the course that I was a GA for, the office hours were held right in the virtual classroom where the students would go for their lectures. So it was like one-stop shop. They knew exactly where to go whenever they needed help. It was always the same spot, which I thought was really convenient. I would recommend doing the same. And this course had 1 midterm and 1 final exam. So the tutorials were held once a week. There were 2 sections, and each one was about 2.5 hours each, and the GAs were required to attend. It involved group work and individual work for the students, and it basically ran where everyone would attend the tutorial within the virtual classroom. The students were given a set of problems by the professor that were posted right at the beginning of the tutorial, and they were due at the end. The students, there was a bit of a split in the students. Some of them would do their assignments directly in Word, and they would have to use the equation writer within Word to finish their assignment. And then the other half would write it like a written assignment, like a typical in-person tutorial, and then they would scan it and upload it into Blackboard. I did find that the students who scanned it, it took them a little bit more time to get their assignment into Blackboard, but some students find that that's much easier for them. So I think it's good either way. And then the GA and the TAs for the course to mark those tutorials and provide feedback before the next tutorial. So we had a week to provide the marks. And I think that's pretty typical in engineering courses. There was 1 lab in this course. It was a group project. and the students in this case had to watch a video of a lab being conducted on campus. So luckily our professor had already recorded this video before the course started, and they were able to post it on Blackboard for the students to watch, and then they had to prepare a report on it. I'm not sure what's going to come in the next semester, but I could see it happening if we start to go back on campus, potentially being asked as a GA to go and record a lab. So I'd like to talk about that and what the students thought about it later in this workshop. And then finally, there was a design project. So this was also, there was only one in the semester. It was a group project, and the students were given CAD geometry in COMSOL software, and they had to optimize it using remote desktop. So if you've taken an online course, you probably have experience using remote desktop, and it's a way for the students to access the computers on campus and access all the different softwares. So I know a lot of students use MATLAB, CATIA, and a lot of other softwares as well, and this is probably something that you're going to encounter in the next semester, so I want to talk about that as well. And as a GA or TA, we had to mark these projects, and the students actually uploaded their simulation files directly into Blackboard, so it was very time-consuming downloading the different simulations to mark them, but that's something that you might also have to face in the fall semester. So the student survey. I sent out a student survey towards the end of the semester to get the students' feedback on how the labs, tutorials, and design projects went, and if they had any recommendations on how they could be improved for the next semester. And this is the main point of this workshop that I want to share, because I think they had some really good recommendations. This survey that I sent out was fully anonymous because I wanted to get honest feedback, and I did. There were a lot of opinions being shown in the feedback, and I made the questions open-ended, so because I didn't want them to just rate the way that the methods that were used. I also wanted them to be able to provide their own recommendations because they had a lot of ideas that I hadn't even considered. So the topics that were asked about in this survey were the tutorials, the lab, the design project. I asked in general what they thought about online versus in-person learning, and then I wanted to get an idea of how many technical difficulties they faced through the semester and how big of a problem it was, and to see if there was any way to get around that. So first I want to go through the student feedback on the tutorials. But just to give a little more context so that their feedback will make sense, the tutorial delivery method evolved over the semester because the first method wasn't really working and a lot of students were having trouble. So the first method was the class was broken into randomly assigned breakout groups of 4 or 5 students, and this was done by the professor. So as a GA or TA, you might have to start the breakout rooms yourself, and we can talk about how to do that, and we'll do that later in the workshop as the part of the group activity. And then each GA was assigned a certain number of groups. So like I had group, say 4 through 8, and I had to jump between those groups throughout the tutorial. And then I would go in and talk to them about the assignment and try to spur some discussion, because sometimes you would go into a room and it would just be silence. And then the marks were based on the quality of the discussion that they were having. So in this case, the professor wanted us, rather than just mark what they submitted at the end of the tutorial, to also evaluate the level of discussion they were having. And with this method, all the students were forced to work in Blackboard. So there were quite a few complaints about this first method, and the professor that I was working with was very flexible and adaptable and wanted to respect the students' wishes. So the method was updated so that the students could decide if they wanted to work in groups or individually, and the GAs and TAs marked solely based on the assignment that was submitted. So it was much more like a classic engineering course where it was based on their problem solving and their written solution. In this method, the students were able to select whichever platform they preferred to use. So I found a lot of students left Blackboard and they went over to Discord or Zoom or whatever they were used to using. So now I want to talk about the feedback I got on these tutorials from the students. So the first thing was that the students wanted more help understanding how the tutorial questions related to what they learned during the lectures. And I think this is something that as a GA or TA, we can have a big impact on. And what I recommend is making sure, if you're in a case where your course is going to have tutorial questions, to get those questions from your professor ahead of time. They'll usually provide them along with a solution. And try these questions yourself ahead of time. Make sure that you know how to solve the questions yourself without looking at the solution. And then if you're having any trouble, look at the solution. And also go through the lecture slides from the previous lecture and try to make connections, understand where the information is coming from. And then when you go into the tutorial, when the students are, if they're struggling on a certain topic, you can refer them to, like, for example, tell them, go back to lecture 2, slide 5, where they showed this thing. Instead of just giving them the answer, you can show them where to look for the answer. I found this was really helpful in helping the students come to the conclusions themselves. The next thing that the students said in the survey was that they want more written feedback to help them improve from week to week. They were saying that they found they were making the same mistakes and getting the same marks taken off every week, and they didn't know why. So as a GA or a TA, I think this is, again, something that we have a big impact on. And so what I found was my marking style changed through the semester. So towards the beginning, when I wasn't really comfortable using Blackboard, I would put my feedback as a written text next to their assignment, but you can actually make direct annotations right on their assignment. I think this helps a lot, because if you put the mark directly next to where the mistake was made, it's easier for them to see what they did wrong, as opposed to trying to write it out in a paragraph. So I would highly recommend, if you can make the annotations directly on their assignment rather than writing the text box. I think it helps a lot. Also, if you have access to a tablet, it helps a ton if you can go onto Blackboard right through your tablet and use your stylus to make the annotations. I think that saves a ton of time. If you don't have access to a tablet, I know from the course that I was a GA, the professor actually had some extra tablets and was able to provide them to the GAs who did not have tablets. So I would see if that's an option as well. A few students commented that they were not able to communicate very well with the GAs and TAs who didn't have headsets and were relying on their built-in mics in their laptop. And this is going to depend on the laptop that you have, but if you have access to a headset, I would definitely recommend wearing it. And if you don't, I would recommend buying one. They're not that expensive, and they're not going to just help you for this, they'll help you in the future if you're having conference calls, maybe one day on the job when you're working with people around the world. So I would definitely recommend investing in a headset now if you can. The next few items aren't things that we as GAs or TAs have direct control over, but I wanted to bring them up because, at least in the course that I was a GA for, the professor was also learning how to teach online and was very open to suggestions from the GAs. So I wanted to go over these things because maybe you can suggest these to your professor, or if your professor gives you the ability to actually control an assignment or an assessment where you'll be teaching and assessing the whole thing and you get to set it up, I think this could also be helpful for you. So the students really like talking with their peers and having the opportunity to work in groups, but they prefer to be marked on their solution rather than their discussion. So there's very different levels of comfort with online communication. Some people don't like using their mic, and a lot of people don't even have mics. So I don't think it's the most fair assessment to force the students to communicate and mark them in that way. A lot of students said that their discussion didn't accurately convey their understanding of the material. They're more used to solving problems rather than discussing problems, which I think it is important to also to be able to communicate. But in engineering, we typically are marked based on our problem-solving skills and our written solutions. So I think it's important to have a little bit of both. There were students saying that they work at different paces than their classmates, and when they were in a group environment, they felt like they were being left behind, and they didn't want to bring it up because they didn't want to make their their group mates have to wait for them. And then finally, there was a lot of comments saying that since the midterm and final exam were based on written problem solving, they wanted the tutorials to be in the same way because it helps them prepare for the midterm and final exam, which made sense to me. You want to be able to practice for the midterm and final exam, so it's not your first time solving problems when it's worth a big percentage of your mark. The next thing was there was a mix between students who wanted to work on their own and who wanted to work in groups. Those who said they wanted to work on their own said it was because it's very difficult to communicate online with group members. And yeah, that can be depending on their situation, their mic, their laptop, their internet connection. And so I think it's fair to let them work on their own if they need to. But other students really wanted to work in groups. They said that the pandemic that's going on, there's a lot of isolation. People feel like they don't get to contact with their peers. And they really liked that the group gave them that opportunity. And other students said that it forced them to come prepared when they knew that they were going to be in a group, because they didn't want to show up and not know any of the information. So they would prepare ahead of time by going through the lecture slides. And they liked that it held them to that standard. So the next thing was that students prefer to have the opportunity to select their group members. So this was one that came up a lot in the feedback. They really don't like being forced into random groups using breakout rooms. They said it's easier to communicate with people they know, and it can be awkward having introductions with people they've never met online. And it took a lot of the time that they'd like to spend working on their assignment instead. And then some people said they got forced into groups where some people completely didn't participate, and that's always going to happen. Some people, they're in, but they're not participating at all. And some students said it gave them extra anxiety because they didn't know what group they were going to be assigned to from week to week, and they were worried about how the tutorial was going to go. And then there were others that said that they were scared to say that they didn't understand something when they're with people that they didn't know and they didn't feel comfortable around. And then still there were not as many, but there were a few students that said they liked being forced into a random group because they didn't know their classmates that well, but they still wanted to have that chance for interaction. So I think what can be learned from this feedback on the different group arrangements is that it's important to be as flexible as possible to accommodate different needs and different wants. And in that way, the students have the best opportunity for learning. Another thing that came up a lot was that the students like being able to move to another platform other than Blackboard. So if you have that option to let the students go to their platforms like FaceTime, Discord, WhatsApp, Zoom, I think I would recommend that because a lot of students are more competent using these other platforms than Blackboard, and I think that they should be able to use whatever tool helps them finish the assignment the best as possible. Another thing that came up quite a bit was that students think they should have an extra few minutes to submit their assignments because compared to in person, the assignments are still the same length, the same amount of questions, but they're not given extra time for uploading, scanning, all the extra steps that go into working online. So I think that's something that should be considered if you're setting up an assessment. So the next thing is the student feedback on labs. So again, this lab for the course that I was a GA, luckily the professor had already recorded it on campus before we weren't allowed to go on campus. And then the students had to watch the video, interpret it, and then do a lab report with the group based on the video. So the feedback from the students on the lab, there wasn't a lot of feedback, but they said that they wished that there were verbal explanations in the video as it went along. So in case it comes up where you're asked by your professor, in the case that we are allowed to go back on campus, if you go back and you have to record a lab, for example, for the students to watch, I would highly recommend either putting a verbal explanation as you're doing the things within the lab, or if you have any video editing skills, putting in a voiceover afterwards to make sure the audio is clear. And They also said that they wish there had been some class time or tutorial time just dedicated to explaining the lab and maybe watching the video as a class. I think that would have been really helpful. In this course, the video was basically just posted on Blackboard and then the students could watch it whenever they wanted, which was nice. But I think it would have been better if the video had been displayed for the students all at the same time in a class setting, and then they could ask questions as it was happening. Because a lot of the students said they really couldn't follow the video. It was a little bit confusing. So now student feedback on online learning in general. So the students listed the things they liked and disliked about online learning, and the things that they really liked was the chat function. I think the chat function is really helpful when you're an online GA too, because if you have multiple students who all have a question at once, you have a timestamp exactly when the question was asked, so you know who to help first. And you can easily send a quick message like, I'm with another student, I'll be right with you, to the other students, and then they can continue working on their assignment rather than in person when you have a line of students who don't want to lose their spot. So they're all standing there and they're not able to advance on their assignment. So I think that is a big pro of online learning. And it can be recorded. The records are really helpful, especially with students all over the world with that can't access the assignments all the time, or the lectures or the tutorials, and they can watch them later whenever it works for them. I think that's huge right now. The cons are that it's difficult to communicate for sure. It's less personal. I don't think I ever saw any of the students on camera, which I didn't really like. You don't get to form any relationships. It's very disconnected and isolating. And it's one of the biggest things for me was it was difficult to review in progress work. So a student would have a question about a certain equation or a certain graph, and they couldn't like show it to me in their textbook or on their sheet. So it was hard to communicate what exactly is the problem that they're having and for me to understand. And this one I honestly don't have a good answer on how to fix this one yet. Maybe you guys do, and we can talk about that after. But this is something I'm still struggling with myself as well. Okay, so now I want to do this group activity, and I think this will really help you guys, if you haven't seen breakout rooms before, to just see what it looks like from a student perspective. So what I'm going to do is break you into breakout rooms of 4 or 5 people each. And what I want you to do is introduce yourselves, and if you're comfortable, turn on your mic or even turn on your camera if you want, and tell each other which course you're going to be a GA for if you have a GA assigned for fall of 2020. And then I'd like you to come up with some practical tip or something that you've tried that's worked or hasn't worked, or something that you can talk about when we get back into the main room. And then I'll end the breakout rooms. So just in case you've never used Blackboard before, if you look on the bottom right of your screen, there is a purple icon with like 2 arrows that point to the left, and if you hover over it, it says Open Collaborate Panel. And then the icon on the far left that looks like a chat bubble, that's where you can send your chat. So in case you want to communicate with the people in your group through the chat, that's how you can do that. So when I send you to these breakout rooms, you're going to get like a loading screen that says starting breakout rooms, and then you will be broken into these groups. And anything you send in that chat, the group chat, will just go to your group members. And if you turn on your mic or your camera, only the people in your group will hear you and see you. And then after a few minutes, I'm going to end the breakout rooms, and it will bring everyone back into this main room. And then I'd like to share whatever you guys came up with. So I'm going to start the breakout groups. Okay, there's a question about how you start breakout groups. So I don't think it will be available to you because you're not moderators, but when you're a GA for your course, you will be a moderator, so you have these extra privileges. And it's right under the Share Content tab. So if you look on the bottom right where the chat is, the first icon is a chat bubble, and then the next one is the attendees. It says 49 right now. And then the next one over is Share Content. So if you hit Share Content, and you're a moderator, you will then see breakout groups as an option. So you can just select breakout groups. And then it asks you how many groups you want. And all you have to do is hit start. So it's very easy once you have the moderator privileges. So I'm going to start that now. No problem.
Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I think everyone's back now. And yep, we're all here. So does anyone want to offer any of the tips that you came up with or thoughts on things to avoid as a GA online or a TA? You can turn on your mic, or if you want to just put it in the chat. Oh, it was interrupted to leave the group without any notes. Sorry about that. I tried sending a message in the everyone chat. Like you have different chats for your group and for everyone. So it might not have, you might not have seen, okay, you saw the message. And also in the chat, one thing that's super helpful for me as a GA or TA, you'll have a chat that's just for you and the moderators that the students can't see. So a lot of the times if I had a question, I could message the professor directly that way. Did anyone have any issues with the breakout rooms that they could see the students having? No issues? Okay, good. I've had it. It's possible to turn on any kind of notification. For me, yes, you can change your notification settings. If you go, so again on that bottom right panel, in the Collaborate panel, you have your chat, your attendees, your share content, and then there's a little like gear symbol for settings. And there's one option there for notification settings. And you can change if you want like something to pop up when a chat message is sent, if you want a no notification. I usually have those all turned on, so that way I don't miss anything. Yes, you can have more than one moderator, so usually all the GAs and TAs and the professor will all be moderators. And even in this session right now, you can see there's me, Elizabeth, and Pierre. So there's 3 moderators in this session right now. So that way, when you're sending a chat message to the moderators, it will go to everyone listed there. I have a question. Will any lectures be exclusively synchronous for the upcoming semester, or will they all be required to be posted at some point? As in my experience, they've all been recorded. I haven't, in the courses that I've taken and the course that I was a GA for, they would be like synchronous where the students are logged in as the professor is lecturing, but they would also be recorded so that people could watch it later if they needed to. The tutorials, though, were not always. Some will be synchronous. Okay. So yeah, I think it depends on who the professor is for the course. And they should describe that usually in like the first class or in the syllabus. I think it would be written out. If you don't mind, I think it would be a good idea to practice as moderator today. I don't think I have the ability to make you a moderator. But I totally get you want to practice. One thing you do is once you're a GA, like you're assigned to your course, you can log into the virtual classroom for that course where you're a GA, and you will have moderator privileges there. At least I did in the course that I was a GA. And you could go in there before a lecture and practice trying different things, like the breakout rooms or doing a poll or whiteboard. Yeah, that was something that I did, and sometimes I was learning like as I went. The first time that we did breakout rooms, I hadn't practiced it before. But once you learn how to do it, it becomes very easy. And I'm show a little bit further on, so I'll keep moving on this. I don't think anyone put in any tips, but that's okay. So some of the tips that I have from my experience, yes, exactly. There are other workshops and they go into more detail on how to do those specific types of things. But I would say for tutorials and labs, make sure you come prepared ahead of time so that you can clearly answer the students' questions. But also, don't be afraid to admit when you don't know the answer to a question that a student has. It's better to tell them, you know, you don't know and you'll be right back. For tutorials and labs, if your professor allows it, I would recommend going on camera if you feel comfortable. I think it helps develop relationships the best that we can online, and invest in a headset if you can as well. For tutorials and labs, I think it's very important to be as open and flexible as you can. Everyone's kind of struggling right now going through the situation. I think most people want to be on campus right now, but we can't. If you're a GA and you're responsible for going from room to room during breakout rooms, I would say always introduce yourself right when you enter. You don't want to be like trying to hear private information or that they don't know you're there. So just introduce yourself quickly, and that way there's no issue. And be careful with what you put in the chat. When people don't see your face or your tone, it can be misinterpreted and come off as aggressive, like if you're telling a student that they're doing something wrong. So just try to be really polite if you can. For office hours, this was something I learned from one of the other workshops I participated in, and it's to put up a pre-made slide when you join your office hours, if it's in a virtual classroom, that just says like maybe the hour that you have the office hours, and say ask them to put a message in the chat when they arrive. And that way, especially towards the beginning of the semester, I find students don't really attend office hours as much. It's more right before assessments. So if you put that up, it allows you the freedom to maybe work on another screen that you have open on your laptop, and then as soon as a student arrives, it'll give you that audio notification so you know to return. And it also gives you the timestamp so you know if there's multiple students who was there first. And I also want to show you how to make a student a presenter, because this came in handy a lot for me as a GA, because when they were doing the design project and they were asking me questions about the software, it was very hard to just do it by speaking about it without seeing the software. So I was able to give them presenter privileges for that one session so they could share their screen, and it made it a lot easier for me to help them. So this is an image of what I'm seeing when I'm the moderator, and this was when I was practicing, so I have just a student as the participant. So if I wanted to give this student privileges to present their screen or share their screen, you can hit this little icon here. It's like a circle with 3 dots inside, and you can hit Make Presenter. And once you give them that option, then they'll see this when they go into this Share Content icon, where they have the option to share their screen. And then also, if you wanted to see when you're a moderator, you have this Breakout Groups button. I don't believe you have that as a participant. And then when you hit that, you can decide how many groups you want, and then you just hit Start, and it will break the students into groups. Communication with your professor. I would check with your professor and see what their preferred method of communication was. I think it's usually pretty typically email. There's also an email function through Blackboard that they might want you to use. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There were times when a student would ask me a question and I thought I had the answer, but I didn't want to tell the students to go down the wrong path. So I'd always confirm with the professor, and I think this helps a lot. You don't want to tell the student something and then it ends up being wrong, and then it comes back on you through the professor. So just always check with the professor first. For marking, as I was saying earlier, if you have access to a tablet, I would definitely recommend it. And for me in particular, I liked the Good Notes app for marking. Like for the midterm and the final, the professor downloaded all of the tests and put them into a folder in OneDrive, and then gave access to each of the GAs to the folder. So then we would go in one at a time and mark our particular question, put it in a new folder that was labeled marked question 1, for example, and then the person marking question 2 would pull that folder and start working on it. And it was a little complicated at first, but I thought it worked really well. If a student wants to dispute a mark, ask your professor for help on how they want to handle that situation. And watch out for bots. So one thing that I noticed when I was marking the design project, there was one assignment where I was reading it and it sounded like really kind of strange, but I thought maybe they just have a unique way of writing. But then I came to one part that said neglect kinetic and potential motivation changes, and I was very confused by that, and I asked my professor why would they say that, and the professor said they've seen that before where you can put an assignment through these bots online and it will just change certain words to make it into a new assignment, but in this case it made the assignment make no sense. So if you see something like that, I would mention it to your professor so that they can look into it as well. Continuous improvement. I would definitely recommend sending out a survey to the students if your professor is okay with that. I thought the feedback was super helpful. And I used this website for sending out the survey. It was Qualtrics. Super easy to set up and very effective. I wanted to leave it on this note that, we're all going through this. We're all learning as we go. So don't be afraid to take chances, make mistakes, and get messy, and try to learn from your mistakes as you go. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to now go through any questions you have. And so there's this survey link here. So this is a survey that you guys can fill out to give me feedback and the people running these workshops feedback. Thank you, Tim. So that these workshops can just get better over time. So thank you very much, everyone. Please let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, that's true. It was kind of funny reading the assignment once I knew. How will the attendance be recorded? I believe that it gets automatically recorded. And you can actually access your, here, I think this is the information. Yes, workshop attendance is tracked, and you can print a copy of your attendance record. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, if there's no questions, I'm going to end the recording here.